Hello and welcome to the webinar. My name is Karen Smith and I will moderate today's session. SSATB is pleased to present Patti Crane and Tiffany Hendryx of Crane MetaMarketing. They'll be discussing ways you can audit your marketing messages on the fly. Due to the number of participants today, I will be muting all attendees throughout the webinar. If you have a question, please type it into the text box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Some questions will be answered specifically by Tiffany or Patti during the webinar, and I will be also reading some of the questions aloud to them at points during the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available online on admission.org. Every registrant will get an emailed link to this page as soon as it's posted. Without further ado, I present Patti Crane and Tiffany Hendryx. Please be patient while I give them control of the webinar screen.
Apparently I am unmuted now, and this is Patti Crane speaking, and Tiffany Hendryx I think is going to stay muted until it's time for us to start taking questions, just so that we're not messing around there. But what I want to say is how honored I am to see that I guess we had 80 folks sign up this early in the semester when you're that busy. So I want to say how fun this is, and I hope we'll be able to deliver something of value for you, and also we'll be able to send you to some deeper materials if there's any more information that you would like to have. So I'm just going to, without further ado, go forward on auditing the marketing messages that you have on the fly. So we said, all right, we know you're working hard. We know you're working hard on getting your message across to your different audiences, but what happens if somebody still wants to send out an email or change up the PowerPoint for the open house, or, you know, ooh, let's do this new direct mail campaign tomorrow, or etc. And we wanted to give you a simple rubric that actually sits on a pretty deep and rich well of information, but a simple rubric that would help you get started. So essentially we think that there are 3 quick questions that you can ask, and of course I'm doing false advertising here. They are quick questions. They're not always quick answers. But for the purposes of getting ready for an open house that you're about to have tomorrow, you could make them into quick answers. So for any item that conveys your message, and of course in my opinion, there is nothing you touch within your admission process that shouldn't convey your message. Nothing is neutral. Everything is important. But for any item, what would you ask? And what we would say is that you've got these 3 questions that you would need to ask. So question 1, we believe, is, can other schools say the same? Because we think that ultimately when you're doing a fast test of your material, the first thing you have to look at is differentiation. And of course differentiation is often touted, but often it's done in ways that are harmful to a school, making a school look different in a way that feels uncomfortable to parents or to families, or for that matter to faculty or administrators or anybody like that, isn't how it works. But we do need to be differentiated to work. So as we go through, let's just take a look quickly at an example here. We call this the last 5% exercise. So what we really feel is that any school, and here we're using the example of Woodward Academy, about 95% of what any school does is highly comparable to the other schools in a given market. There's no question about that, they're, you know, what a good independent school is supposed to be doing, unlike, say, a public or a diocesan Catholic school or something. What a good independent school is supposed to be doing, it's pretty parallel, and by the time you get into that rarefied atmosphere of the top 3 or 4 schools in a market, they're going to have a lot of similarities. So instead, what we're interested in is not that first 95% of what you do, which in the case of Woodward Academy is we're a century old, we've got pre-K through 12, we're non-sectarian, and we're an independent school. Well, yay, and that's absolutely true of a whole lot of other things as well. at any rate, instead of that, we're looking for the last 5%. We want to see what's in that last little tiny bit that's not true of anybody else. So we want to know what defines Woodward and only Woodward. Now, if we would look at what Woodward typically answered, and Woodward Academy is in Atlanta and a very well-respected, fine school, Woodward was always talking about how we are the largest in the continental United States. Actually, Punahou is larger, but in the continental United States, Woodward's it. And we're the oldest in Atlanta and the most diverse in Atlanta. So let's all beat our chests and be proud of those attributes. So, and it's absolutely true, we're really large. This is an example. Look at that little W on the screen. That's where Woodward is. This is how far people drive to get to Woodward. And you can see we're almost to the Alabama state line and closer to Tennessee than anybody should reasonably be, etc., as you see here. So that's very impressive. But of course, a real issue for them is how distant Woodward is from everyone. And all you have to know is that this is a picture of Atlanta from where Woodward sits. This is how far south of downtown Atlanta Woodward is. And of course, the interesting thing is that most people think of the suburbs that typically have fine independent schools in them and families with capacity to pay, etc., are that far, again, north of downtown. Not south, but north. And so, of course, we know what that implies. As people say, tell me again. So Woodward says we're the oldest and we're the largest and we're the most diverse, and that's COM1. That's your outbound stuff, what we say to our audiences. Meanwhile, Woodward's audiences often say, you are where? Because, of course, they're going back and thinking of that traffic and thinking of that location, which, by the way, most people have only been, many people around Atlanta have only been to the part of town that they are in, College Park, because the airport is there, not because they've ever thought of it as a neighborhood where there might be a fine school. So most people just say, you're where, and they never get to all these issues about oldest, largest, and most diverse. So what people say is they say, well, and how is that relevant to me? Are you personal? Maybe you're not personal, because if you're largest, you couldn't possibly be personal. Oh, if you're the most diverse, maybe you're not selective. So then looking at what audiences say to each other, what those two circles are saying to each other in what we call the COM3 area, which is all the discussion that's happening offline that we don't control from within our schools. Basically, people say, oh, you're kidding. All right, it's just too far to bother. So Woodward was falling off of the consideration list long before it should have. And we all know that if you get someone on campus and they're a good fit for your school, that they can fall in love and they can enroll and your yield is very good. But of course, if you can't get people to even consider driving to where you are, you're not in a good place to cause that to happen, even if you are the oldest and the biggest and the most diverse. So essentially what we saw was that regardless of what Woodward was saying about what they thought were their differentiators, how families interpreted that was not useful. So we have to now go to look at what the issue of relevance is as it relates. So what we got to say is, let's stop comparing, let's start contrasting. And so what you want to ask yourself as you're asking that first question, question number one about differentiating, is are we contrasting or merely comparing? Hey, we're just like all the other people with one little tweaky difference, because our uniforms are green instead of burgundy or whatever. Won't cut it. So we've got to say, why should our best fit families care? So what we do is we look at our last 5%, and of course this sits on a very, very deep treasure trove of investigation about the school, but you know your school. So we talked about Woodward, and we realized they know with certainty that wise guidance, diverse perspectives, and real strength of character ensure a more complete definition of success. That there are many highly competitive hothouse schools in Atlanta, and Woodward is highly competitive, and yet it does not have what's seen as that hothouse environment, and that's because of the completeness of their definition of success, which they are partially able to do because they are so large that there are incredible number of niches available for different students at Woodward. There's really a place for everyone, regardless of what their gift is in. So what we want to do in order to assure differentiation is, remember we had the triangle going this way. Now we have to flip the triangle over, and it's almost like looking through the wrong end of a telescope or something. We're going to take the last 5% and make it the filter through which we look at everything else about our school. So in this example of Woodward Academy, it ensures a more complete definition of success, and of course here we've still got all our attributes, our whats, but we get into our whys. What families want from Woodward and are afraid that they can't get from any independent school is a sure thing. And so what we have to talk to them about is how Woodward is able to arrange a surer thing. So we say Atlanta's long-proven independent school for families who want the certainty of a more complete preparation for college and life. And that takes us to what at Crane we choose to call a meta-concepts, where we say some things are certain. And then the certain things we say are not so much about Woodward. The certain things are about human nature and families and how much they love their kids and how much they want the right niche for their child and how capable Woodward is at providing it. So just taking very quickly that same thing about being really far, instead of the traffic image, now that what we've got here is the actual Woodward bus, which they have dozens and dozens that fan out all over Atlanta every day. But we've got the human and the humane part of it. And this brings us to our second of 3 questions, which is also relevant based on the Woodward issue. Does it matter to best fit prospects? Does what I'm saying matter to best fit prospects? So that's getting us in to the area of relevance. We all know, we don't even have to think about that what often a faculty member might think of as relevant, or what a trustee might think is relevant, or what the director of IT might think is relevant, in many cases is not what our parents and what our prospective families, or if we're working with older children, what our kids, our prospective high school students are thinking of, or even prospective middle school students are thinking of as relevant. And so we've got to have a really deep understanding of what matters to them. So if, staying with the Woodward example for a second, families want a sure thing, what we do is that we try and go in right away and resonate with what's really inside that family. So this is not how we lead with the Woodward program, but it's very important. This was the hot potato, the forbidden, we can't talk about that thing that scared so many people. Oh wow, you can't start with location, you can't talk about that until they're in love with us or they'll freak out. And instead we say, can't go under it, can't go over it, can't go around it, you've got to go right through it. So we ask the question at a very early stage in the admission funnel, where we say, how far would you go to ensure your child's more complete preparation for college and life? So now we've taken a generalized objection and we've personalized it to make it a relevant issue for our families. And you see some screen back photos there. Those are kids on MARTA, which is the Atlanta Mass Transit rail system. And yes, kids all over Atlanta ride MARTA to Woodward. And of course in New York or Chicago, people wouldn't think that was odd. In Atlanta, that's not what typical people do. You don't think of riding rapid transit to get your kid to school. That's not how it works. And so this is very important here. And so one of the things that we show in here is we go right for what goes on MARTA. And of course, it's texting. And so we talk about 5 blocks away, we talk about 15 miles away, 35 miles away, and here is an answer down at the bottom. Dude, my sis just kept talking in the car this morning, I got nothing done, and the person responding said, you should have taken the bus with me, I finished history and Spanish, and I played Angry Birds. So this is an example of what their life is really like. These kids are incredible time managers because they can figure out what to do during their commutes, which are often very, very long. And going back to answer the question, what would you take to ensure this thing? Here we go. The answer is we would go. How far would you go? We would go as far as it takes. Then you see that we've reframed the Woodward neighborhood into all of Atlanta that holds a certain attitude. We've taken away the construct of the Woodward neighborhood as a geographic area, and instead we've handled it as a mental state if you're in the Woodward neighborhood. So developing deep respect for difference, gaining more independence, mastering time managing, understanding that privilege requires sacrifice, and there, of course, your student becomes more relevant, more aware. So here's some more of those texting things where people just deal with the barrier right in front of you. And essentially, here we remind people of the sacrifice on the very front end because it is the difference that is the true objection, but we've reframed the difference in a way that works. So we say it's not only about the strength and experiences your student gains here, but also about what he chooses to give up to attend Woodward. And once again, there's a contrast thing. He's giving up the expected path, the quick solution, the obvious choice. Why choose the early mornings, the bus stops, the train rides? Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. So we've gone and made our case on a differentiator that could be either harmful or one that somebody wants to hide, but instead we've turned it into a crucial part of the message. And so there it is with the parent saying, seeing the person he's become, we do it all again. Now I have another example about helping it matter to best fit prospects, but I'm going to stop here for just a minute and ask if there are any questions, Karen, that you're wanting to forward. I said I would stop 3 times and create an opening for questions, so this is stop number 1. Got anything there, Karen?
At the moment, Patty, we don't have anything in the queue, so obviously you're doing a really great job explaining everything that you're going through.
You're putting that so nicely. Okay, wake up everybody. It's after lunch. All right. Okay, fine. All right. Well, let's talk about another issue of relevance. And the issue of relevance that goes here relates so deeply to who is really our target audience, not who's our bigger audience, but who's our perfect match, our best fit family and our best fit students. And in this case, I want to use an example from the Chicago Academy for the Arts, which is the only there's Walnut Hill in Boston, but other than that, the only other private independent art school that's not a boarding school. There's, of course, there's Interlochen or there's Idlewild or whatever, but they primarily function as boarding schools in a remote area. And instead, Chicago Academy for the Arts is right there in the city. And of course, there are fantastic independent schools in Chicago. The Lab School, Francis Parker, Latin School, so many other ones that are just terrific. But Chicago Academy for the Arts had a really interesting and difficult sale to make, because the only students who will make it through this very, very demanding school that is a day school, but the only way they're going to make it through is if they are also terrific students. They have to be thinkers, and they have to be readers, and they have to be learners. And the interesting thing is that often people wanted to assign students who were academically troubled but artistically talented to the school, and the answer is no, we're a prep academy. And as a prep academy, we need students who are firing on all cylinders, intellectually and aesthetically. So the interesting thing we did there is we created a rubric to do two things. First of all, to help the student self-identify, and then to help the student explain themselves to their influencers, to their middle school teachers, to their parents, to other people who say, you're a smart kid, you can't go to art school, you have to go to academic school, as though they were mutually exclusive rather than capable of being mutually reinforcing. So we came up with the concept of the red kid. And our idea of the red kid here is that the red kid is the academically strong student who's thinking academically and is paying a lot of attention. And this would be what the red kid's day would look like. They spend a lot of time thinking about their academic. They work all day. They have a bunch of AP classes. Then also sometime around, 8:30, somewhere around then, after dinner, they hunker down and they study for 2.5, 3 hours, and then maybe they take Saturday off, but then on Sunday night they study again. And so this is what their academic life looks like. Now let's look at the blue kid, and you know what I'm going to say next. The blue kid is essentially the person who's thinking about their art form, and we use paintbrushes here, but it could be anything that the blue student is obsessing over music, or thinking about their jetés, or making pots in their heads as well as with their hands whenever they can. So what's their day like? Well, we discovered that for the students who are the best candidates here, a lot of them have that super early morning, a time that whether they wish they could sleep in or not, they don't get to sleep in, because that's when they're either at their school or at their separate lesson doing super early morning arts work. It's not different from a swim team kid who's doing that 6 a.m. 90-minute swim every morning before school starts. And then the second school is out, that blue kid is off to all their different lessons, or to the ballet academy, or to the painting studio, or anything else. They have a little break for dinner, and then they're back at it again, particularly if they're really, really passionate about their art form. And then, of course, on Saturdays, their Saturday and their Sunday is taken up with doing as much as they can with their arts, no question about that. All right, but of course, what we're saying is that the rule for the Chicago Academy for the Arts is got to have kids who are always both. And when you look at always both kid, that's a purple kid, without a doubt. There's our red and our blue together. And that child certainly cares about their intellectual life, but that child also certainly cares about their aesthetic life. And when they look at this schedule, because they are both things, that child looks at this schedule and realizes what their life is like. And I bet everyone, let's see, all of the 60 attendees at this webinar right now are people who know a kid, whether it's athletics or arts or something else that they might do, whose life looks just like this. And they're lucky if they get to breathe, and they certainly don't have any you know, they define multitasking for their generation because of how passionately they're pursuing both things. Well, we think that's just fine, but at Chicago Academy for the Arts, they have another way. So let's take a look at what this could be like for their student. And when we do take a look, oh my God. So here's your OMG moment that the student at the Chicago Academy for the Arts has that says, when I probably still am going to get up at 5 a.m. and go, you know, do my own practicing of my, you know, piano sonatas or whatever, but the deal is everything I do all day feeds both the red person in me and the blue person in me, both the scholar and the artist. And it's so empowering and it's so exciting. So I'll just quickly show you an example of really understanding how to make that relevant. So here we have their dance program is particularly well respected, but you see how this is graphically a very aggressive program with all these angles and all this painterly background and things like that. But let's take a look at our dancer guy. He's Joey. At the Academy, art isn't just after school. It is school. These are just little one-sheet stuffers that go in their pocket folder. They don't even have a view book because a view book isn't relevant for a school like this. But all we say is, could you be a scholar artist? Find out by going to futureinthearts.org, because we say art, there's a future in it. So there's our Joey when he's outside of a classroom, and when that kid has some of the highest lift we've ever seen. And this is a young man who started dancing as an 8th grader, and he's only a sophomore now, and look at that. So it's just absolutely amazing. Classmates, castmates, always both. So you see how we're invoking the purple kid every time, making sure we're relevant, and to the parent of the purple kid who doesn't know how on earth they're going to carve out enough time. All right, mover, thinker, always both. And we talk about the vocabulary of dance as well as the vocabulary of intellectual thinking. Maker, thinker, always both. So that just gives you an example of that. And here I just want to show you, this is a concatenation of some slides that are about integrated study at the Academy, because essentially we don't put this in a brochure per se. We suggested that the Academy use the red kid and the blue kid, and then the solution being the purple kid, to have the integrated study during face-to-face encounters and during discussions. And of course what happens is that people weep because they finally realize, oh, this is me, this is my life, you're telling me, scholar, artist, always both. So that's an example just put together on one sheet of multiple slides. So now we're getting to question 3, and I think we're in good shape because it looks to me like it's 3:30, so I think we're right where we're supposed to be. And that is that we're asking, is it really you? Now, the first thing I need to say is that no one on this webinar would ever put out something that you felt was grossly inauthentic. You're too smart, you have too many people looking over your shoulder, and you're too honest to do that. So we're not saying that people are doing inauthentic things because they're trying to be false. But just to say something is not false does not make it authentically representative of your institution. So when we ask, is it really you, we think an awful lot about the issue of voice. If your institution is voice, and something I don't have a slide for but that I would like to suggest to you is a wonderful game that you can play, not while you're doing your little 3-minute test because there's not time, but some other time, or in the car when you're driving somewhere or whatever. And the game is called Surrealism. And in the game of Surrealism, all you say is, if we were a meal, what kind of meal would we be? And of course, there's a big difference between fast food or a 5-star restaurant or you know, a packed sack lunch or any other things, and then ask yourself why. Or if we were a work of art, or if we were a period in history, or if we were, and any nouny thing can fit into the thing, and it builds you all sorts of metaphors. Well, sooner or later, you start to realize what kind of voice they would have. We did this exercise with some people in a New York school recently, and we got a ridiculously high number of family-related analogies. It was always about relatives, or about the dining table at holidays, or about celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, and celebrating all of our generations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for that particular school, it was very clear that our language has to pull people into the family, or we won't get an authentic voice for that school. And interestingly enough, the current materials for that school have a relatively aloof voice. And so we said, this is not how you're describing yourselves to each other as you workshop your way through this. So using Morgan Park Academy as an example, this is not yet published. There's a photo shoot to be done in a couple weeks, but we can show you a few examples of how this concept works. From Morgan Park Academy, which also happens to be in Chicago, and ironically, like Woodward, is on the south side, when the south side isn't perceived to be where probably the most appealing options can be found. At any rate, for Morgan Park Academy, even the Catholic schools are obscenely crowded, amazingly crowded. So these little classrooms with Harkness tables with 12 students and 1 faculty member are amazingly more intimate than people know. And furthermore, it's a very authentic feeling place, partially because it's been there for 140 years in the same place, and Chicago has grown around it, and it's historically involved, but also because that's just the nature of the people. They choose to be, in their case, on the south side, not that far from Midway Airport as opposed to O'Hare. So let me show you an example of how we thought about voice for Morgan Park Academy. First of all, once again, can't go over it, can't go under it, can't go around it. We're going right through it. The south side, small scale, independent school for real learning. All right, that's fine. That's an identity line. But here's the tag, and look how voicey it is. School should feel real. And people say, well, what else is it going to feel? Well, believe me, once you get the contrast going, you can make the contrasting message come across. So here's an example of how this works. For this school, we are giving them what we call the hall talkers for the campus tour. This school is so voicey, and everybody has such a voice, sometimes to the irritation of the faculty members, but frankly that's how it works there, so we got to deal with it. Essentially, we're even going to be annotating the campus tour in student and faculty voices. So take a look at this. So it looks like one of those, stern signs that says do not enter, except of course we have, unless you have an idea to share. Because in these Harkness classrooms, it's all conversation based instead of lecture based, and so by putting that out there, we're absolutely showing it. Here's another example of a hall talker. Speak up, thinking out loud in progress, which is of course the opposite of shush, reading in progress. So this is like the opposite of the library sign. But you see how talky these look, which is why we call them hall talkers. That's actually taken from an old grocery marketing term called shelf talkers. All those goofy things that rush, that reach out at you and make you buy some of those Lay's potato chips whether you wanted to or not. But we think hall talkers are a fun thing to do in a voicey kind of place like this place is. And here's an example of how it looks on a particular direct mail piece. Simply that it's all very hand-drawn and textured and funky and authentic looking. You'll always see your teachers talking together. They're excited to teach, which makes us excited to learn. You know, talking about walking in, seeing 12 of your friends. We're knocking that concept of 12, 12, 12, 12 home, because even the places that tout small classes have 22 and 24 to a class. So that's important. So here's another example. Not all schools are created equal. We are small. And down here is a student handwriting. I was so quiet before coming to MPA. Looking forward here, discussion-based classes. We're just being very aggressive and getting that across really well. Before this tour was halfway over, this place felt like home to me. And that gives you an example. And here's an example of an ad that's not going to look like everybody else's ads. Where can your daughter speak up and stand out? And there we are going 12, 12, 12 again. And school should feel real. So somebody who says that school should feel super polished and buttoned up and crispy and fancy is not who belongs at MPA, but the person who agrees with school should feel real. We've been able to get to the voice and authenticity there. What does real college prep look like? And here's our chance to reframe that, yeah, SATs and GPAs are important and they work fine at Morgan Park, but boy, do they do more than that. And here's an example of doing it. And of course, then what we're going to have is a landing site called therealmpa.org. And how funny, because everybody likes to think on the south side of Chicago that, you know, they all know the real story anyway. It's that kind of a culture, so we just went with it and did it. All right, so here we are. We've asked, have we done differentiation? And by the way, have we done the differentiation that is relevant to our audience rather than the differentiation that sticks out for us, whether anybody else cares or correctly interprets it or not? And then we've also asked, are we really being us? Are we authentically us? Are we voicey enough to sound just like us if we're a voicey place? And of course, if we're not a voicey place, that would be important too. So if we were going to bring that all together, I'll show you one more example that's an example of how that comes together. And that is the school called Dexter Southfield, which is in Boston, which was founded by Joseph P. Kennedy, President Kennedy's father in 1926, I think was the year. And it was the Dexter School for Boys at that time. And then they added a girls' school more recently and called it Southfield, and then they added a high school 10 years ago. And essentially, it's a radically different school than so many of the schools in Boston because it really is working hard on traditions. The reason that it was founded was to carry out certain traditions, and it's still doing it. So melding classic college preparation and traditional character education for boys and girls, pre-K through grade 12. I would say basically that this would be the most opposite of Morgan Park or CAA's look. Maybe a little more like Woodward, but not the same as Woodward. And so the tag for them is Classic Works. And the issue about Classic Works is let's take a look at how that builds up. And this material came right out of our differentiators for them. So where comportment fosters character, right? Because they have a lot of rules about comportment there. And for the families who want them, that's what they want. They're excited about that. Where Latin and grammar retain their relevance. We all know that lots and lots of schools no longer teach either, but this school will never let go of that. This is a part of their founding DNA. So I'll just show you all the different differentiators that are important to them. They have one of the biggest telescopes. That's certainly the biggest on an independent school campus and one of the biggest in the whole Boston area. So discovery science sharpens minds and illuminates wonders. Every child has to do public speaking, building poise and confidence. They actually have the boys' school and the girls' school, and they actually handle the boys and girls differently, even though they merge them more and more. They take athletics very seriously, and the camaraderie and the resolve of that is important. And doing your best is a big deal there. So taking a look at how this works, this is the first pinstripe school we've done in 25 years, and this place is so Brooks Brothers that we thought that pinstripes just absolutely fit it. So here you go, high atop of Brookline Hill, a classic education awaits your child. And you see, you know, we have sort of fun Brooks Brothers tie motifs going, not just the original boring navy blue, but it's still very classic. So how do you find the one that best fits your child, your values, and your expectations? This school is very much about a parent choice. So here we go with what's important. You want your child to communicate with conviction? We hear you. You have always taught your child that good manners matter. We couldn't agree more. You want your child to discover the universe through science. We share your vision, and of course vision, telescope, looking at the stars. You want your child to learn and write the traditional way. We are on the same page. You want your child to grow up in a school that nurtures boys and girls differently. That's our school. You want your child to stretch physically and creatively. We are on your team. So essentially we're going after all those differentiators that are inside the parent and showing how they are inside this school. So here's an example of an ad. It's looking a little oversized here. But again, we've got all these careful angles, and it's very buttoned up, and all the kids are in their ties and their button-down shirts and their blazers, and it's exactly how it should look for this school. But it's an authentic representation, all the while knowing the importance of a firm handshake and looking a person confidently in the eye. It's very much an important part of what they do at Dexter Southfield. And so we used photographs to contrast, if you will, with the buttoned-up nature of all the diagonals and all those pinstripes and all those, what are they called, rep ties and all those kinds of things. And essentially because the children here are darling and happy and the rooms are light-filled and beautiful, and so we're able to do that. Yes, proven since 1926, the classic Dexter Southfield education. So that's how we talk about classic works. And this has got to be one of my all-time favorite pictures ever. And that child is reciting a story by heart where he's telling the story of the animals. And you just see how animated and how comfortable he is. And that says everything that Dexter Southfield needs to say. And here's an example of looking at older students on the journey toward college. And I will have to admit, we used that interesting pattern to be liners for envelopes and liners for pocket folders and everything, because once again we were going with a look and a feel, not just a set of words, not just for the verbal learners, but building a foundation that endures. These guys around the table in the room with the fireplace is absolutely a classic Dexter Southfield image, and it's exactly what they want and need to get across. So that gets us back to our question about, can you ask your rubric, question 1, is it differentiating? Question 2, is it relevant to the people I really care about? And 3, is it authentically me? Is it really us? Is it really your school? And now I am open to questions, and it's 1:15. So do we have any questions yet, Karen or Tiffany? Do you want to provide some?
This is Tiffany. We had one question so far that was sort of the $1 bajillion question, I think, which said, so how do you determine that last 5% message? Patty, if you could boil that down into a 30-second response. I can't wait to hear that. that's kind of what we do for a living, and you can do it. It's just really difficult, and it's sort of one of those things that it's hard to describe your child when you birthed that child and raised that child, and you couldn't possibly see your child with outsider eyes. It's the same thing with the school. In a way, the more you're in love with the school and the better you are at your job and the more you understand your school, in a strange, ironic way, it's almost more difficult to explain that school or understand that school as an outsider. So what we do typically when we're getting to know a school is we first look at it from a complete context market point of view and imagine that we are moving to your city and look at all the schools that we could be considering, public, private, parochial perhaps, and look at their marketing messages, look at their offerings, look at what they say and what they don't say, and try to imagine who we think you are, not knowing anything. Then we do the next layer, which is basically getting to know your school as a prospective family. So looking at all of your marketing materials, but also getting to know your school as almost a cultural anthropologist. So looking at everything that's ever been written, school histories, any marketing messages that have existed, but also just internal communications, planning reports, board documents, that kind of thing. And usually that's where I personally get a little grouchy with a school, which is a wonderful place for me to be, because then we show up on campus and do focus groups and individual interviews, and my favorite part, which is sit in on classes, and you fall in love with the kids. And because we've seen so many schools, we can kind of tell what's different about a place. That doesn't mean it's a difference that matters yet. That's where we get to the relevance point. But we can tell what's different about a school. It's very difficult to do that unless you put in the hours and kind of go through those steps like we have. But that doesn't mean you can't do it.
Tiff, I would also add, if I could, that thinking about there's another 3 questions. I guess we're just always a 3-question group. I can't help it. Love triangles, I guess. But there are 3 questions that help you get all the way to your last 5%. Almost everybody starts with the question, what do we do? And we don't think that your whats are very important because, again, they're too similar to everybody else's whats in your category, in your genre. So instead, we like to start with the question, why do we do what we do? And thinking about why Dexter has Latin and grammar and uniforms and does things the way it does, and why the Chicago Academy for the Arts does what it does, which is like every literature class is taught from the standpoint of someone who creates artworks as opposed to from a critic standing off to the side from it. At any rate, we go to the why do we do what we do, because we want to understand what your values are, because you will definitely have distinctive values. But then the place where all of the payoff comes for your last 5%, in my opinion, is from the third and best question, how do we do what we do? That essentially how we do it. Let's think about Morgan Park. Our how is 12, which if you're Andover or Exeter, you've had Harkness tables forever and you're used to the 12. But if you're in Chicago looking at overcrowded parochial schools and overcrowded public schools, 12 is a crazy number. So that's a how, and also the informality and the deep relationships between faculty and kids, even though it's a day school, not a boarding school. The how is always comes out of your culture, and your culture is your culture. It's not the next school's culture. So if your last 5% could be replicated by another school that has a sugar daddy with a checkbook, it's not your last 5%. Because if essentially the how of Woodward is grit, you know, grit has become popular the last 2 years thanks to Paul Tuff and Angela Duckworth and those people. But you do need to be very aware that if it comes out of your culture, which is some things are certain, we need to try all these things, and it's good for your kid to have to plan time management, and this is how it'll work, and we're with them all the way, etc. Then when you get to the how, that can't be replicated with a checkbook. That can only be replicated with how you've built your culture. And that tells you your last 5%. Just also want to say that there are a bunch of examples on this URL that I've posted here. cranebrandwork.com/essentials will get you to what we call little click decks that tell the story of different last 5% for lots of different kinds of schools and colleges, so that you can look at examples that remind you of that.
Patty, we have another question that I love because I talk about relevance a lot that says, how do you test whether or not a message is relevant? And my kind of snarky mother who's paying her own tuition checks right now answer to that would be, well, is it something people will write a check with a comma in it for? It's relevant if somebody will pay for it. The less snarky and more true answer is probably, does it tie in with some outcome, a transformative outcome, not just an AP score or an SAT score or a college admit, but does it tie to some transformative outcome that a parent desperately wants, whether or not they even know that that's a thing or not? So for example, there could be, every school we talked about today could conceivably have, say, a lacrosse team, or let's just say teach Latin. Say they all teach Latin, but they teach Latin for different reasons. It might be that at the Chicago Academy for the Arts they teach Latin because they wanted to talk about oration in a certain way, and it teaches a certain logic of mind or of presenting. It might be that at Dexter Southfield they teach Latin because the classic works are written in Latin, and we need students to understand writing that was created in that certain way. It might be that you know, at your school, Latin is taught to teach students a certain kind of logical approach to a problem. It might be that it's taught because it's a language-based school and we wanted to give kids an understanding of the roots of all Romance languages. There are lots of different reasons that schools, you know, all schools teach English. Most schools have PE. Everybody has lunch offered somehow. All of these things that 90% of schools do, but you do them in a different way, and that different way is because it comes out of, like Patty said, it comes out of your why. Why are we showing up every day? But the why exists also to serve to what end? What kind of human being are we trying to turn out at the end of this process, whether it's an 18-year-old, whether it's an 8-year-old, whether it's an 80-year-old. You know, what kind of alum do we want to have? What kind of person, what kind of thinker, what kind of citizen do we want to create at the end of this process? And so, you know, the best test of that, I think, is when you look at a senior in any school and say, gosh, I'd love my daughter to grow up to be just like her, or I might let my daughter date someone like him at some point. I can't even imagine that right now, but that's to me how you determine relevance. If somebody says we have a new natatorium, I think, well, I couldn't possibly care less because I don't care about swimming. Well, I might care about swimming if you tie swimming to some sort of outcome that I do want for my child: grit, confidence, poise. Lots of things could come out of a swimming program that I've never certainly thought about. I just made this up right now. But you have to sometimes draw that connection for a prospective family that may not be self-evident to them, even if it is self-evident to you.
Do we have other questions?
That's all that's come in so far. Typically, we wait a couple minutes to see if there are any stragglers that have anything coming in. But I think you did a wonderful job explaining everything, and certainly there were some wonderful creative ideas there. I know that one of our participants said, I have lots of ideas sparked from yours.
Oh, so glad to hear it. Right, the silence is deafening on this kind of webinar where we're not seeing the questions that are going to you. So I love to be able to figure out if we're meeting needs or not. I think the important thing, and there are plenty of other rubrics on our website, and we just always invite everybody to take advantage of whatever learning can be gleaned from anybody, anywhere, anytime. I think the important thing is I'm going to give you as a parting shot a thing about ways of getting feedback. There are 3 kinds of feedback, and 2 of them really are useful and appropriate and helpful when you're trying to evaluate a message. Again, whether you're evaluating a message, that's a big deal and you're about to publish, a new website versus I'm about to push the send button on an email. The 2 kinds of feedback that we consider really helpful are, first of all, your gut. You know your school. I hope you love your school. You work there, so I'm going to assume you do. And because you know and love your school, your gut is the gut of a person who knows and loves the school. So whatever your gut is telling you that it feels, listen to your gut. It's a valid thing. Then the second kind of feedback is the kind of feedback where you've really done some depthful quantitative or qualitative research, where you really absolutely know who your target audience is and you have a lot of variables about them. And I would say that in a hyper-simplified version of that would be the purple kid. That if we would test everything against not how does a blue kid or a red kid react to that offering, but how does it make a purple kid feel, and how does it make the parents, the scared parents of that brilliant purple kid feel. That's what we want to know. So those are 2 good kinds of feedbacks. The one kind of feedback that you want to try and avoid, again, whether it's a 3-second or a 3-year process, is second guessing. And second guessing is what we do when we don't have good enough ways to go to primary sources, like, really meeting families, or really going to classes, or really conducting tours, or really doing whatever it is that we do. But saying, well, I love this, but I can't imagine that XYZ kind of people would love this. Well, you have an easy enough way to find out. They'll tell you what they love. Don't have them evaluate your messaging. Have them evaluate your school. And it's really important to think about that. Too many people spend too much time thinking about what's the font, what's the color, what kind of photo, etc. Instead, just say, what is this place? And then, do I feel this place from the messages coming or not? So that would be my parting shot, would be to suggest to you that if you can trust your own gut, in all 3 of these areas, and then if you also have done some study, you're okay. And don't let second guessing make you do the uncourageous thing or the unfun thing.
That was excellent, Patti. Thank you so much. I just wanted to draw your attention to a comment by one of our attendees. This meeting met every need. We are so glad this happened earlier in the year. We're clapping for you from Philadelphia.
Oh, thank you, Philadelphia!
And Philadelphia will be seeing you soon. We'll be seeing you next week. So.
Oh, that's absolutely right. Oh, my goodness,
thanking Patti in person.
All right.
So, I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and a special thank you to Patti and also Tiffany for providing our attendees with such a helpful presentation. Just a reminder, I will send all registrants a link to the online webinar page on admission.org, where a recording of this presentation will be made available. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you so much.